Hey guys, we're back in the shop. Today I'm going to show how to make a recycled copper cuff bracelet using really basic tools. We're going to start off with using the material that I cut and annealed from the copper pipe that I'm recycling. So the first thing you need to do is cut out your blank that you're going to be using out of the sheet. We just use a hacksaw for this, clamp the piece to a table or a workbench. It's kind of a pain doing it by hand because the sheet moves all over the place, but try to hold it steady. And the key is light cuts on the saw. If your knuckles are white on your saw hand, you're definitely pushing too hard and gripping too hard. So we have a bunch of blanks prepared. We'll pick one. This is a little bit wider, maybe 1.25 inches. The first step is to deburr the copper sheet. I usually just use my fingers to peel off the bigger bits to start with, because I find that when you move on to filing, that those bits curl over the edge and then they become really hard to file off. They kind of stick into the edge that was sawn. File at an angle and just take all the burrs off, feel it continuously with your fingers, and you'll know if there's any sharp spots. You want to get rid of all those. Next we're going to move on to a vise, and we're going to start bending the edge. We want to roll the edge over. This gives some support, some rigidity, and it's also a design feature. I like it aesthetically, and it feels more comfortable on the wrist. So we're just going to use a pair of Lyman's pliers in a cheap drill press vise, which has been working out fantastic for me for lots of things. When you use the pliers, you want to kind of push into that bottom edge and just slowly start bending it over. And that puts a tiny little crease there, which helps define where the bend is going to happen. After you get it bent to about 45 degrees, you move on to the hammer. Chuck it up in the vise again and just start hammering that edge over very gently. You can control where the bend takes place based on the angle of the hammer and precisely where you're hitting, so you'll see me changing the angle quite a bit. I'm not actually hammering on the bend, I'm hammering in front of it on that lip that I'm rolling over. You want to try to keep this as even as possible. There's going to be some variation in it because you're hand hammering it. That's okay. If you want it to take, twice the time, you could make sure that it was really straight, or you could put this in a bending break and do it that way. I like the little variation that comes out with doing something like this. I like leaving the tool marks in to kind of as a testament to how it was formed. So you want to roll this edge over a little bit past 90 degrees, because the next step will take it to we'll take it out of the vise and start finish rolling that edge over completely. So you want it past 90 degrees slightly to aid in finishing the rolling of the edge. So after this, we'll move on to a wooden post. And there we go, just past 90 degrees. So this is just a 6x6 wooden post that's cut at about waist level. It's not set into the ground. I can move it around wherever I need to. And this works as a really nice soft-faced anvil, especially for stuff like this where you don't want the anvil to leave marks in the work that you're doing. So again, hammering at an angle, slowly start rolling that edge over. Try to keep it even. Make a pass kind of the whole way down the length of the workpiece, and then go back. Any high spots you can knock down, and then just rinse and repeat until the edge gets folded over. Once the edge is at about 180 degrees, what you can do is actually hammering at an angle into that part. You can knock down that corner that's sticking up, which will take off the sharp edge, and then finally, using heavier blows, you can seat that roll. So the piece is going to curve up quite a bit as you do this. You can see the curve there. So we'll flip it over, lay it down on the stump again, and then I'm just using a hardwood block here and a couple firm strikes with the hammer, and it'll flatten it right out. If there's any waviness, you can go back and do it again. Straighten it out again, because we're going to go back in the vise now for rolling the other side. And you can see the unevenness there. I'm okay with that. I feel like it adds a lot of character to it. So now we'll go back in the vise and do the same thing for the other edge. So again here, just bend this over to about 45 degrees before you move on to finishing rolling with the hammer. We'll roll this with the hammer now. And flatten again. If you use the hardwood block parallel with the cuff, it'll just flatten it out. If you use it perpendicular like this, you actually end up scalloping the center. And that scallop creates just like just a mild curve across the width. So there we have it, both edges rolled. And now we can start texturing. So we're going to use fairly heavy hammer blows down the center of the piece, because I want larger divots. So the heavier you hit with your hammer, the deeper the divots are, the bigger they are. So for this piece I wanted kind of large hammer marks in the center of it with smaller ones on the edges. There we go. Flatten it again, and I'm using the block perpendicular to the workpiece to kind of flatten out that center portion. And now we'll move on to the edges. Again, lighter hammer blows here for smaller divots, and the edges, which were previously rolled over, especially during the hammering portion, have been work hardened, and so they won't dent in quite as easily. And then we'll finish up with hammer blows on the side of the piece. This will test your hammer skills, trying to hit a narrow edge with a ball peen. Practice, practice, practice. One final flattening. And there we go. The whole piece is textured. So now I'm going to put some of those copper pieces in the vise to act as soft jaws so that I don't mar the cuff with the hardened steel jaws on the vise. And now we're just going to shape the ends with a file. So I'm just going to put a slight curve on the ends of the piece. This will make it more comfortable to get on and off so there's no sharp corners digging into your skin. Once the filing is done, I'll hit it with some 360 grit paper, sandpaper, and knock all the burrs off, especially on this portion of the cuff. You want that to be as smooth as possible. And then using 360 again, we will sand the face of the cuff. And give it a good wipe down with a rag. Now, because the piece has been work hardened, we're going to anneal it before we shape it into the cuff shape, into its final shape. So I'm just going to use the torch here and heat it up. Watch for, you can sort of see the colors starting to run as I'm moving the torch back and forth over the piece. And I'm not actually taking this to a full red heat. It was in bright sunlight, so it's hard to see. It's barely red when I quench it. And that won't give me a full annealing. It's just a partial annealing, so it's still a little bit stiff, but it's soft enough that I can work it easily now without any uneven hard spots. You could choose to leave this finish on right here if you wanted, and these are just the colors from heating. And now we're going to move on to shaping the cuff into its final form. I'm using the handle of a pickaxe here because this is what I currently have available. I intend to make some mandrels for shaping these to make it a little more efficient, but this works for now. And so you go back and forth. I work from the ends in to keep the curve as even as possible. If you started at one end and moved to the other, it's really difficult to control the curvature of the piece, and so you end up with an uneven shape. And this is a lot of back and forth and eyeballing the piece and making tiny little adjustments. I'm using a 2-pound wooden mallet here so that I'm not marring the surface of the cuff. So back and forth, shape it, open it up with your hands again, shape it again, rinse and repeat until you get the shape that you're looking for. And this process of shaping is helping to work harden the piece so that it'll be a lot stiffer, so that it won't deform easily while you're wearing it. But there's still enough flexibility that you can, the cuff is adjustable to whatever wrist size you need. And take your time with this process. Slow movement here is much better. And it looks good enough for a test fit. Let's see how it works. Now after this is done, I'm going to do one final work hardening of the face, because most of the hammering pressure that was being applied was to the edges of the piece, because they stand proud of the textured portion in the center. So I'm going over this with a ball peen hammer just in the center to help stiffen the cuff up a little bit. So just go the whole way around the piece a couple times. You don't need heavy blows here. And once that portion's done, we'll move on to pickling. This cleans off all the oxides from the heat treatment and any scuff marks from hammering. And the pickle that I'm using is 1 part vinegar to 3 parts water. This is about a quart or a liter, with 1 or 2 heaping tablespoons of salt per liter, more or less. You dip it in, and you'll see me pulling it in and out. That's helping to loosen some of the oxides that I'm removing as I'm dipping it in and out. and you'll see it works really quickly. So once it gets pretty clean just from the pickle itself, then you can wipe it down with a rag, and that will clean any remaining oxides off. And I'm using like a green Brillo pad to scrub, because that will get into all the tiny little grooves. And so this has been rinsed in water, and now we're moving on to the patina. This is my homebrewed liver of sulfur. The stability of this stuff is amazing. It's been over a week now and it's still quite strong. So I have maybe 250 milliliters of water in that little pot, and I'm going to just put in, not very much at all, a couple drops. And one more time. And again, there's no smell from using this stuff, which is incredible. It's really pleasant to work with. Give it a stir. The solution will turn kind of green. And wear gloves for this part. We're going to dip the whole piece as opposed to painting it, like I've done with other ones. So we'll let that sit for just a couple seconds, and the color change is immediate. So it starts off with a kind of brown with purple overtones. There's like some purples and reds as it progresses, and you just kind of stop the process by rinsing in water whenever you're happy with it. It's going to continue to darken a little bit, so you want it a little bit lighter than what you're shooting for with your finished product. So stop when you're happy and rinse it well in clean water. Pretty good there. And then we're going to take 1200 grit sandpaper, and I'm going to very, very lightly sand the high spots off so that exposes the raw copper, and then leaves the patina in the divots in the hammer texturing. And very, very lightly here. And sand this until you're happy with the appearance of the cuff. And if you end up taking too much off, it's fine. You can just go right back in the patina solution, back into the liver of sulfur, and try it again. And sometimes you have to go back and forth a few times to get a result that you're happy with. Give it one final wipe down. Final inspection, and when you're happy with the appearance, then we can move on to sealing it, and I'm going to use a hot wax finish here. So I'll put the torch in the vise on low heat and use a pair of tongs to hold the copper. Copper heats up really quickly. You don't want to try to hold this with your bare hands. The copper is probably going to get to around 200 degrees or so. Anything in Fahrenheit, anything above that, and you start getting oxidation colors happening from the heat, which is also a useful effect if you want. But heat it up to the point where I'm just using a standard candle, and as soon as the candle starts melting when you're rubbing it on the piece, it's at the right temperature, and then the wax will flow around. And so coat the whole piece in wax. It'll still be dripping off a little bit. I use a paper towel and just wipe it off. And this leaves a really nice smooth matte finish. If you want a gloss, you could do something like a high gloss lacquer or something like that. I like the rustic look that this gives here. Plus it's really easy to maintain or reapply. So wipe the piece down. It's now cool enough I can handle it with bare hands. And we're done. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope this was helpful in seeing my process and learning how to do it on your own with minimal tools. Remember to like and subscribe, and you can follow me on Instagram as well. Thanks!